technologies for learning. So again, I would like to invite you all to join our thematic sessions as they have already started. Thank you very much.
taşıyacak.
Welcome back to all of you. I would now like to invite everyone to share which session you took part in, which thematic session did you attend? Was it team number 1, protecting education? Uh, you will see it appear on your screen. So you will see this poll question appear on your screen. So which thematic session did you attend? Was it team number 1, protecting education financing, or number 2, reopening schools safely? Perhaps it was number 3, focus on inclusion, equity, and gender equality. Or there was also number 4, reimagine teaching and learning, or our last choice, team number 5, harness equitable connectivity and technologies for learning. So if you want to, please share with us which session did you take part in? And we will have we should have the poll results appear on our screens. I'm waiting for the poll results to appear. We will see if everyone, we are still waiting for people to share which thematic session they attended to. And I will soon be able to share the results with you. So I think we now have the final results. So replying to the question, which thematic session did you attend? 5% of you attended the Team 1 session, protecting education financing. 20% of you attended the Team 2, reopening schools safely. Then we have 27% of people attending the team inclusion, equity, and gender equality. Definitely a very interesting team. The majority of people, so it's 48% of people attended Team 4, Reimagine Teaching and Learning. We can probably see that that is a very important and essential issue given the current crisis we are all going through. And apparently no one attended the team number 5. And I would like here to apologize because apparently we had some technical issues, which is unfortunately often the case with today's Zoom's webinars, but we are very happy that you all took part in these sessions. I will now give the floor back to UNESCO's Assistant Director General for Education, Stefania Giannini.
Thank you very much, Valeriane. Interesting data, and thanks all of you for these very intensive, stimulating discussions. I tried to jump from one session to another one, and it was really very much about learning. And welcome back, everyone. Well, now I would like to open another critical topic of the 2020 session of the GEM in the post-COVID-19 context. It's about how we are going to operate, to work, to cooperate together as an education community. And it's about effectively responding to the massive disruption that we are just talking about all through the sessions, and about reimagining more inclusive and equitable systems of education. Well, let me say honestly, I think we had demonstrated over the past months, 8 months more or less since the beginning of this crisis, our capacity to be one single voice of education community, our capacity for constructive, agile collaboration that directly supports countries and try to give solutions and quick wins sometimes. Now we have to be disruptive, let me plain words, to accelerate action in the next coming months and years. And for this, we need a real credible, a real effective and sustainable global platform for cooperation and coordination of this theme. Well, it's not a mystery to anyone here in this room that the so-called global education architecture has been characterized through the years by complexities, by some fragmentation, duplication, and sometimes even competition. We must be very honest. And we don't want another new mechanism or layer. As you said already this morning before, it's not a matter of adding another floor to the building, but it's a matter of fortifying the foundations of the building itself. And effective coordination for SDG 4 2030 means connecting dots at two levels. On one hand, such a mechanism must bring together political, financial, and technical resources to achieve the SDG 4 Education 2030 agenda, one of the most cross-cutting goals. And on the other, actions at the global, regional, and country levels need to be better linked and coordinated so that policy guidance, financing flows, interventions support national education development coherently and effectively. Beyond this, as this pandemic definitely has made clear, education must reinforce alliances across sectors. It's about cooperating with health, nutrition, connectivity, learning for jobs, climate, and other dimensions that definitely we touch upon also in this in technical segment of the Global Education Meeting 2020. And this is key. This is really key for quality, inclusion, and equity. Well, the improved cooperation mechanism should be anchored, grounded in a set of key principles. I will briefly mention, you see on this slide. First, country-centered global education cooperation. Second, greater simplification and efficiency. Third, better linking of policy steering with finance. Fourth, greater accountability through more robust data and evidence. And fifth, and last, a shared sense of collective responsibility. This slide, the last one, represents somehow the minimum essential elements of the renewed global cooperation for education. Of course, the devil, we say many times, is in detail. And let me emphasize that we need simplicity and no more. And a new global education coordination mechanism should seek to strengthen the connection between different pillars. A high-level political body, a data and knowledge hub to guide, to drive policy directions, and a finance hub somehow to ensure complementarities related to funding gaps. We have an opportunity. We have, in my opinion, a tremendous opportunity, a unique opportunity to reboot and capitalize on our joint efforts and achievements through the last months, and to protect and promote the right of all to quality education. All means all, as the GEM report just published said to all of us. As indicated in the draft outcome of the document, if adopted, UNESCO will immediately get the process of. It's about setting up a working group, organizing broad consultation with member states, partners, and all other stakeholders, including international and regional organizations, civil society, teaching profession, foundation, the private sector, and so on, with a view to developing a proposal for improved mechanism very, very fast. In this process, we should not lose sight of our goal. This mechanism is there to support the advancement of education, especially where the needs are the greatest, where the most vulnerable are still left very much behind. For this, it has to be politically influential, globally respected, and nationally effective. We count absolutely on your support in this endeavor, and I look really forward to hearing a diversity of perspectives and opinions from our speakers. I thank you very much once again for your attention and participation.
Thank you, Stefania Giannini, for reminding us how important it is to improve the global education coordination mechanism. And we will now hear from Myriam Kittir, the Belgian Minister of Development Cooperation.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Myriam. Thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome. Dear participants and your excellencies, I would like to congratulate UNESCO for the successful setting up of the Global Education Coalition in response to COVID-19. Experience gained and leadership shown can guide us to make the Education 2030 framework for action more efficient and to steer us toward SDG 4. The COVID crisis has a serious impact on the education sector. Before COVID, the sector was facing two important issues: insufficient access, especially for girls, and the quality of education. The global pandemic has aggraved both. Due to the closure of schools in more than 180 countries, the situation is critical for at least 430 million students. They have basically been cut off from schooling. We already know that scores of them will never go back. It is time to build back better. We have to use SDG 4 as a compass and strive for quality education for all. Belgium is investing in the education sector through its multilateral partners, UNICEF and the Global Partnership for Education, by bilateral cooperation, by supporting NGOs and funding EU development programs. During the crisis, we have stepped up our efforts. In Uganda, for example, pupils were sent home in March. For lack of any decent digital learning environment, 15 million children were, as such, excluded from learning. On October 15, only 10% of these were back at school. As a partner in Uganda's education for over 20 years, Belgium quickly reorientated. Belgium has reorientated his app program. We provided support to the Ministry of Education to develop its strategy for distance learning. This focused on communication between the school management, the teachers, and their students. IT gifted teachers were gathered in a help desk to support the transition to a digital environment. We are convinced that the only way to overcome this crisis is to collaborate. Exchanges of best practice through educational policy coordination on the reopening of school in a safe way can be useful. This is especially the case when we keep up all countries aboard. In addition, we have to focus on getting the most vulnerable back to school. Special attention needs to be paid to young girls. Gender disparity in education persists. This crisis has made the problem more acute. Girls are more likely to drop out on and to be victim of abuse and violence. The challenges are huge. The economic consequence of the crisis might push back our efforts to attain the SDGs by years. With the solidarity and the complementarity of all actors in the sector of education, however, there remains is a possibility to avoid destructive side effects. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Miriam Kitir. Thank you for being with us. And now, joining us from Norway, I would like to welcome to the floor Axel Jacobsen, State Secretary of International Development for the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to speak in this important session on global coordination for education. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we are even more off track to reaching the SDG 4 by 2030 than we were before. This situation calls for renewed political commitment and a stronger and more efficient global education architecture. I would like to highlight three areas that I believe will be particularly important in the times ahead: leadership, financing, as well as evidence and data collection. First, we need commitment and leadership at the highest political level. National governments must commit to keeping education high up on the political agenda. In addition, we need a high-level political body at the global level mandated by UNESCO's member countries. Such a body will be important to ensure that education is a top priority on the international political agenda, as well as to coordinate efforts in order to improve efficiencies. Second, we need collective efforts to improve financing. With COVID-19, the estimated annual financing gap of $148 billion for reaching the SDG 4 will increase substantially. Domestic financing will remain the most important source of financing. It must be protected, even when the budgets are under pressure. Unless education spending increases, the right to education will be an empty promise in many cases. Still, for many countries, domestic funding will be insufficient. Therefore, we need to prioritize international education financing. We must make sure that multilateral and bilateral financing reaches countries and groups that need it the most. It is essential that funds are spent well. To this end, national capacities for governing, planning, and administering the sector must improve. Third, we need more knowledge in order to govern the sector better. Data and other forms of evidence are key to making the right policy choices and financing decisions. We also need coordinated efforts and research to develop education global public goods. And we welcome the SDG 4 benchmarking process and look forward to in-depth discussions at the 2021 education meeting. The task before us require close collaboration and strong coordination between countries, international institutions, donors, and civil society. And Norway stands ready to work with all partners in a collective effort led by UNESCO to strengthen SDG 4 coordination. Thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, Axel Jacobsen. And I would now like to pass the floor to Robert Jenkins, Global Chief of Education at UNICEF. My apologies.
No, thank you.
Jenkins with us? Sorry.
No, thank you very much. Actually, UNICEF, UNESCO, we work so closely together. And with my dear friend Stefania, it's an easy mistake to make. And
yes,
I just want to...
also nice and committed to education. So UNICEF and UNESCO working together, and I'll let you speak now. Thank you so much for being with us, Robert Jenkins.
Thank you. But to be honest, I do think it's indicative of how closely our two organizations work together. And I just want to support my dear friend Stefania's comment when she said, I do feel the education response to this pandemic showed what is possible, and it showed how we can work together closely, and it showed what is possible when we do. And I think our very quick together collective response in the education sector too, as schools were closing throughout the world, and now also supporting the reopening in a coordinated, coherent way, has indeed enabled us to show what is possible. And I think it has also increased our appreciation for working very well together and leveraging each other's comparative advantage across the entire spectrum of those of us working in education. I also fully support Stefania's analysis and the way she structured the discussion around and the presentation around the different elements of a coordination structure and what it must include. And I also fully support everyone's comments on we now have a unique opportunity to leapfrog or do a step change or transform or disrupt. All of these words that I think are indicating a big change in the way we work together and the need for us to work more effectively together. And I really do feel we have a once in a long time, once in a generation opportunity to do just that. Why do we have this once in a I think it's because in the awareness of the importance of education, the importance of teachers, the importance of enabling children to continue on their learning pathways during a time of crisis has never been higher. Right at the household level, people, I have parents like myself as a parent have renewed attention to and appreciation for the role of teachers. and the role they play in communities and the role they play in each of our child's lives. So I really do feel we seize this opportunity of this appreciation. It will be challenging. I think why it's challenging, and Stefania also mentioned this, and Her Excellency from Belgium and His Excellency from Norway mentioned, we have a number of different strands that need to be coordinated. We've mentioned the political, financial, and technical, and the importance of bringing those dimensions. We've mentioned the importance of country to regional to global, and the importance for that horizontal structure to be linked both ways, upwards and I think downwards in the sense of more coherent support globally to reach countries. I think we also, and I just want to flag the importance of, and Stefania mentioned it, the importance of other sectors. And this is a particular challenge of those of us who work in education. We recognize to enable a child to learn, we need the support of other sectors: nutrition, health, immunization, our close partnership with WFP on school feeding, and the importance of enabling schools to provide the full range of services. Because even if we get the pure education side right, without these other forms of support, particularly to marginalized children, we won't be able to achieve the targets of the SDGs. So cooperation also requires working across sectors. Lastly, the other challenge, but I think it's also an opportunity, is non-public, if you'd like, or community-based, private, and other actors, innovators that are coming into the space of education. I think it does provide us an opportunity, all of us working in the education. It does also provide a challenge to maximize all these different resources and innovative approaches and energy, if you'd like, to again leapfrog education. So, and I'm sure all of us are recognizing the potential and the need for us to remain very well coordinated and coherent, and as broad a net as possible, or tent as possible, to seize on this opportunity across all different actors in the education space. So count on UNICEF to continue to be at the table with all of our sisters agencies and other stakeholders in education, and we greatly appreciate the partnership that we have with UNESCO, with many others, and I look forward to seizing this once in a generation opportunity to leapfrog, transform the education coordination structure into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert Jenkins, Global Chief of Education at UNICEF. Thank you for your commitment. And as you pointed out, this 2020 Global Education Meeting is about all acting together for universal right, education for all around the world, about uniting all our nations to protect education. Let's now hear from Victoria Ibiwoye, Youth Representative to the SDG Education 2030 Steering Committee and Founding Director of One African Child Foundation for Creative Learning, a youth-led NGO addressing the inequality in education in Nigeria.
Thank you so much, Valerian. It's such a great delight to be here at this very important gathering. We are currently facing an uncertain future right now, and the pandemic has further exacerbated global inequality in education. But it has also brought to limelight areas where we need to focus our attention and priorities. As youth representative of the steering committee, I've been fortunate to be part of several consultations and dialogues to listen to the issues that affect young people, as well as share my own experience when it comes to education. Today, I would like to focus on 3 key priorities that I believe are critical to the outcome of the Global Education Meeting. First is on education financing. Following a series of consultations and joint use statement was presented at the last steering committee meeting, the youth, which also includes student groups, called on government, donors, and decision makers to guarantee adequate financing for education systems, including investment to achieve connectivity for all and ensure continuous teacher development. We've also heard from the government of Norway how important this is. The Global Partnership for Education, GPE, is leading the way through its Raise Your Hand campaign. The campaign aims to raise an ambitious funding goal of at least $5 billion to enable the GPE deliver funds and to support lasting change in countries where children are at risk of missing out on education. Secondly, I also believe that investment in continuous teacher development should be a key priority. We've seen how teachers are essential for continued education. So therefore, we need to ensure that every teacher is adequately valued and trained to deliver quality distance learning and to be proficient in delivering 21st century skills to their learners. Organizations like Education International and UNESCO are particularly leading the front. UNESCO Institute of Capacity Building in Africa, UNESCO ICBA, is committed to strengthening the capacity of teachers to transform learning, both within and outside of the classroom in Africa. I'm proud to be part of UNESCO ICBA's project to strengthen the capacity of young peace builders in conflict-affected regions through funding and also through capacity building programs for young people. Finally, I want to stress the value or the importance of youth voices. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of engaging young people in decision-making at all levels, from consultation to planning to implementation, and finally to evaluation. The Save Our Future campaign, led by Education Commission, is championing youth voices in education policy making. The Youth Vision Statement outlining recommendations of young people across the world will be launched this Thursday at the high-level segment of the GEM meeting. I would like to conclude by saying that the only real change that we can make is the one we make together. So definitely multi-stakeholder partnership should be at the forefront in everything that we want to achieve out of this meeting. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Victoria Ibiwoye, a perfect example of how young people can make a difference. Thank you so much for your words. And now I will call Maria Khan to the floor. Maria Khan, the Secretary General of the Asia South Pacific Association for Basic and Adult Education and a civil society member of the steering committee. Maria Khan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, Your Excellencies and colleagues, I am from ASPE as introduced, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the collective consultation of NGOs on Education 2030, which represents in the Education 2030 Steering Committee. We congratulate UNESCO on convening this meeting for an inclusive dialogue on ways to accelerate progress towards SDG 4 in the COVID-19 context and beyond. We note the initiative to review the global education architecture in this period of profound challenges. In this regard, we find it essential to recall premises that informed shaping of these mechanisms as outlined in the Education 2030 Framework for Action, which bear highlighting and, in our view, retaining. We affirm the leadership role of UNESCO as a specialized UN agency for education in coordinating this mechanism and the Education 2030 agenda. The multilateral character of the mechanism should be preserved, where member states as duty bearers on the right to education remaining in the driving seat. The architecture and processes with expressions at global, regional, even country levels should be inclusive, broad-based, multi-stakeholder in composition, including ensuring institutionalized representation of civil society, the teaching profession, and youth through accountable and representative formations. SDG 4 is premised unequivocally on education being a human right and a public good, committed to advancing lifelong learning opportunities for all. The mechanism to steer this agenda should in no way undermine or compromise this and the efforts to strengthen public education systems to deliver best on the SDG 4 agenda. We note the three components of the reformed global mechanism that need to coexist and cohere: political, technical, and financial. We submit, however, that political leadership is paramount. We would certainly like to see a far more empowered Education 2030 Steering Committee equipped to confront the challenges that affect us all, aggravated by and yet beyond the COVID-19 crisis, diminishing democratic spaces, the rise of anti-science movements, violent extremisms, racism, the ongoing climate crisis, as examples, requiring a powerful response as an education constituency that the SDG 4 mechanism have to deliver on. As custodians of the full SDG 4 promise, it should be empowered to steer meaningful dialogue on how to arrest the narrowing down of this agenda in its implementation, influenced no doubt by how current financing priorities globally have left some targets like youth and adult education, for example, lagging behind, or the ways the international community can leverage its competencies to scale up domestic resource mobilization through fair and progressive taxation, where excess profits and wealth are taxed more, harmful tax incentives and illicit financial flows put to an end. Finally, we hear a desire for simplification. We have no quarrel with the need for clearer mandates and efficient functioning. But the real world is complex, a mechanism that offers space for intersectoral cooperation, accountable and representative voices and perspectives will equip us better in meeting our agreed commitments, including truly leaving no one behind. We in the CCNGO commit to doing our part in facilitating a broad-based consultation on this important matter in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Khan. Thank you. So let's now hear from Shantanu Mukherjee, Chief of the Integrated Policy Analysis Branch, Division for Sustainable Development Goals at UN's Department of Economic and Social Affairs.
Thank you, Valerian. That certainly was quite an introductory mouthful. But Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues and friends, thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you today at this very important meeting. SDG 4 has long been recognized as a bedrock for progress towards the other SDGs and also essential for improving human capabilities. But progress on the other SDGs too contributes significantly on progress towards SDG 4, and equally falling short or reversing progress on these other SDGs has profound effects on SDG 4. Indeed, falling short in this way can produce losses in education that may be especially hard to reverse. The minister from Belgium already gave the example of a girl child who drops out of school when her family falls into poverty, but may never return even when the family's economic status improves. This pandemic has brought the SDG interlinkages into sharper focus, emphasizing how progress on a host of MDGs, things like clean water and sanitation, SDG 6, or energy, SDG 7, or even universal access to broadband, are crucial to the COVID-19 response and recovery. Services like these matter just as much for schools and education. And inequalities in accessing them at adequate levels of quality threaten to translate into inequalities in learning and opportunities. So it is for this reason that we in UNDESA believe that improvements in education outcomes must go beyond coordination and political prioritization in the post-COVID world within the field of education itself. They must also be driven by increased collaborations with and across other sectors, so that investments made in these sectors actually deliver maximal returns for education. Now, UNDESA works at the interface between science policy and multi-stakeholder action at the global level to help advance this. For example, at the 2020 High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, we drew upon the report we have produced, the Global Sustainable Development Report from 2019, to underscore the mutual co-benefits and to emphasize how quality education builds capabilities to cope with disasters and increase resilience to both technological change and climate change. In fact, yesterday in New York, the Secretary General just announced the appointment of the 15 independent scientists who will draft the next Global Sustainable Development Report due in 2023. Undoubtedly, such considerations will inform their work as well. My team is privileged to support this along with UNESCO and others in the UN system. But 2023 may seem like an eternity away in our times, but even in the immediate term through 2021, there are other significant opportunities to build these collaborations. The Multi-Stakeholder Science, Technology and Innovation Forum, to be held in May 2021, is a space to underscore the foundational role of education in supporting technology, science, and innovation capacities that deliver on the SDGs, and also recognizing the many innovations in developing countries that have expanded access to learning through technologies. Several of these are available already through the online platform of the Technology Facilitation Mechanism, again, an enterprise where UNESCO and DESA work closely together. Other summits and high-level events, such as the first ever dialogue on energy and the second Global Sustainable Transport Conference, can serve to highlight some practical ways and, more importantly, gather stakeholders from other sectors under the education umbrella so that many of these co-facilitating or enabling roles of these other sectors for education are fully realized. I would like to conclude by assuring that UNDESA stands ready to contribute to strengthening the global education coordination mechanism, including by advancing science and knowledge that can help inform educational response and recovery, and working with the many other stakeholders to leverage interlinkages between quality education and the SDGs. I wish this meeting all success. Look forward to the outcomes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to you as well, Shantanu Mukherjee. Let's now turn to Joe Bourne, Chief Technical Officer at Global Partnership for Education.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of the session. Like others, GPE welcomes UNESCO's leadership in talking about enhanced coordination, and I really agree with something Stefania said right at the beginning about, through our response to the pandemic, we have proved that we can respond quickly and that we can respond as an international architecture to the needs at country level. Part of GPE's response to COVID has included support for UNESCO, UNICEF, and the World Bank, in particular to support enhanced global and regional coordination around continuity of learning and around things like areas like enhanced knowledge, evidence sharing. So I think I agree there's a real opportunity to build on some of this. And not surprisingly, I also fully agree with the comments about really making the focus of this, the centerpiece of this needs to be, the nationally owned efforts to improve education. So how can we best support nationally led, sufficiently financed, well-evidenced strategy using a global and regional architecture that fosters peer learning, cross-border collaboration, leverages the capabilities of different partners, including cross-sectoral partners, but also, very importantly, leans in on galvanizing the global political will that's needed to deliver on SDG 4 in the face of these unprecedented setbacks that we're seeing. As many of you know, GPE is in sort of the final stages of developing its own strategy, its new strategy for the next 5 years. We've been very conscious of how we can have a strategy which is really responsive to the needs of countries, especially as they are facing the pandemic. I just wanted to share a few sort of points that have been coming up from that, which really reinforce this conversation. So one of them that we're hearing from ministers is a level of ambition. They wish to transform. They wish us support to transform, to leapfrog, to crowd in the best ideas behind their leadership of the education system. And they are not asking us to act in an incremental way. The second big message we've got with regards to coordination is this real call to align aid, and that's the financial, the political, the technical efforts, behind national plans and behind national priorities. And this has come up time and time again in our conversations with our developing country partners. And then one of the third big pieces that's come up, of course, is domestic financing and the importance of domestic financing, and a number of others have talked about that as well. And even within those conversations, we've been talking not just about the volume of domestic financing, which is really important to keep pressure on, but it's also going to be incredibly challenging, but also issues of the equity of domestic financing and the efficiency of domestic financing. Fundamentally, is it reaching the most marginalized? Is it helping the shared agenda of leaving no one behind? And then finally, of course, I'd be remiss, but actually thanks to Victoria for already mentioning this. Of course, we have just launched, GP's just launched our financing campaign, Raise Your Hand, aiming to raise at least $5 billion so that we can continue to do the role that we play in supporting governments, leveraging the capabilities of all of the partners around the table to really get behind the government agendas of transforming education in a sharp, responsive and ambitious way. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jo Byrne. Thank you for sharing your experience, ideas, and conclusions. I will now invite Sylvia Montoya to the floor, Director at the UNESCO Institute for Statistics and co-chair of the Technical Cooperation Group on the SDG 4 Education 2030 Indicators. Sylvia Montoya, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, and thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak in this technical component of the global education coordination architecture. As the background paper for today's meeting says, the technical component aims to provide data analysis and knowledge products for the steering committee. So my aim is to make today 2 appeals to you on World Statistics Day. Paragraph 27 to 103 of the Framework for Action describe the role of the UNESCO Institute for Statistics and the Global Education Monitoring Report in supporting the monitoring, follow-up, and review functions of the steering committee based on the SDG 4 global and thematic monitoring frameworks. Since 2015, we have moved steadily to improve the coordination and cooperation between member states to develop the SDG 4 monitoring framework by establishing the Technical Cooperation Group on SDG 4 Indicators, the TCG. The TCG is a body of 35 members consisting of regional representative member states, international organizations, including civil society. We're committing to strengthen country representation in 2 ways. First, to ensure that not only the head of Ministry of Education planning units, but also representatives of the national statistical offices join the TCG to promote within-country data coordination. The second is to ensure that members represent not only their own countries, but also the interests of the regions. There is my first appeal to you. We want your support in this effort to strengthen the representation of your countries in the TCG. The TCG meets once or twice a year. Actually, we're meeting next week virtually over 3 days. In the first days, we'll be dedicating to reporting on working groups' work on decisions related to indicator development. The day 2 will be dedicated to the challenges of data collection and reporting as a result of COVID-19. The last day, day 3, will be dedicated to a forgotten commitment in the Framework for Action, benchmarking. Coming back to the Framework for Action, paragraph 28 of the Framework for Action had called on countries to establish appropriate intermediate benchmarks, for instance, 2020, 2025, seen then as indispensable for addressing that accountability deficit associated with longer-term targets. However, this has not happened so far. Last year, the TCG adopted 7 indicators as suitable for benchmarking on learning, completion, out of school, preschool, primary trained teachers, education expenditure, and equity. We have since then developed a proposal on how benchmark would be the minimum level to be reached by all countries in a region. We're currently reaching out to regional organizations and coordination mechanisms on SDG 4 at the regional level to request that they propose, based on consultation with countries, a roadmap and a timeline for the adoption of these regional benchmarks. The development and use of the benchmark is a key component for strengthening the global education coordination mechanism. Speaking the same language, they aim to achieve 3 objectives. The first one is to identify and fill data gaps that hamper SDG 4 monitoring. The second is to assess progress relative to feasible trends. The last one, the most important, is to use the finding to lead to relevant policy and finance responses, the kind of action that the new steering committee needs to support more strongly. Last year, during the high-level policy forum, we found that the world is off track from achieving SDG 4. In 2020, the setback to enrollment, learning, and equity caused by COVID-19 is stressing more than ever the need to set in benchmarks. There is therefore my second appeal to you. We want your support in our efforts to adopt regional benchmarks. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and over to you.
Thank you, Sylvia Montoya. And finally, but not least, I would like to invite Anina Mattsson, Program Director for Dubai Cares.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for allowing Dubai Cares to make an intervention at this really important meeting. I'll try to keep it brief. I don't want to repeat what has already been said by many. So I think the one thing that's really clear for us is that the kind of global disruption caused obviously by COVID has really reminded us that we are all connected in one way or another. But there's been some really encouraging examples of cooperation since March, obviously one of being UNESCO's launching of the Global Coalition for Education Response to COVID, but also Education Cannot Wait's COVID response, which has been really effective and well coordinated on the ground, GPE's response to the COVID crisis, as well as the Save the Future campaign and so on and so forth. There's been a really concerted effort to highlight the impact that this disruption has caused on education systems all around the world, and that's something to be applauded. And I think from our perspective as an entity that is involved in a number of the sort of education coordination and funding mechanisms, we do think that it's a real opportunity to build on this momentum and this spirit of global collaboration, and naturally strengthening the SDG Education 2030 Steering Committee is a really important part of that. Especially if we are serious about really addressing kind of the fragmented global education system at the moment. But better coordination also needs to be more inclusive. So Victoria, as well, to your point around ensuring that youth voices are really strongly represented also in coordination mechanisms when it comes to education. And Robert, to your point, also thinking about cross-sectoral cooperation a lot more, recognizing that the learning crisis that we have in our hands today is not exclusively down to education solutions. It has to do with nutrition, it has to do with health, it has to do with protection, it has to do with poverty at large. So really strongly encourage us to think how we move forward to coordinate beyond the sort of silo mechanism of the SDGs in general. Importantly, moving forward, what needs a really concerted, coordinated effort is the issue around financing. We cannot achieve SDG 4 without the adequate resources. And as we've seen in the recent GEM reports, I think the estimate is that global aid is likely to decline up to 2 billion by 2022 as a result of COVID-19, causing a 12% drop in international support for education, which is disastrous to say at least. So a really strong coordinated effort is needed to engage with new private sector actors, specifically through global advocacy, to earmark and mobilize additional and new funding for education. This cannot be stressed enough. What's also really important is that we are ensuring that our pooled funding at global level is rooted through and contributes to strengthening existing national coordination mechanisms and partnerships on the ground, because the coordination on the ground is the most important element to ensure really effective delivery, as well as to address inefficiencies in education spending at a national level. And what we would like to advocate for as Dubai Cares really is to ensure that as we mobilize funds, that we really channel our resources to what works, building on Sylvia's points around the data. And for example, with the world now turning to education technology, to really ensure that we understand where that actually has most impact, and really ensure that those most vulnerable are able to be included in that. And access to affordable internet connectivity is also a critical issue to address and to convene around in a coordinated way, and really to ensure that education technology can reach its potential, as well as to kind of decrease wealth and knowledge gaps as opposed to increasing them. And finally, what we think is positive, though, is that if COVID has shown us anything, is that change is possible, and in crisis sometimes lies opportunity. And it's given us in the education sector, I think, an opportune moment and almost like a license to allow us to reimagine the overall purpose, content, and delivery of education, with equity and inclusion really at the center. And Dubai Cares, we firmly believe that we need new ways of coming together across borders, across sectors, and across actors in order to really drive new solutions for more effective and action-oriented way forward, in order to ensure that we do not leave anyone behind. And we'd like to draw the attention of this forum to the unique opportunity for increased collaboration, as well as a real amplification of the education cause globally. At the World Expo in Dubai next year, where 190 countries will be in attendance, opening its doors in 2021. So together with Expo 2020, Dubai Cares and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the UAE is launching Rewired, which is a platform on global education that really aims to rewire education for a future that is prosperous and sustainable for all. And the aim of the platform is really to bring together existing efforts and partnerships to amplify their impact, while at the same time fostering new collaboration amongst new and unlikely allies. The idea is really to ensure that all of our efforts come together, are more coordinated, and are brought to broader audiences outside of our education sector. So we welcome all of you to join us in preparing for that summit that is going to take place in December next year. And we really want to make sure this event can be a pivotal moment for really to galvanize momentum around action for education for the 10 years ahead, and that we're able to amplify all of your efforts in Dubai next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anina Matson from Dubai Cares. And let's turn now to Professor Kazuhiro Yoshida, co-chair of the SDG 2030 Education Steering Committee.
Thank you, Valerian, and thank you all speakers for such valuable contributions to this session. On behalf of the Global Steering Committee, I'm pleased to pick up the bottom lines of our discussions. First, COVID-19 has added new challenges in addition to existing ones, and present opportunities for innovation and transformation to accelerate actions to achieve SDGs, leaving no one behind. Second, we all agree that education must receive a top priority as a key enabler for all SDGs to overcome the negative consequences of the pandemic and build back better. Third, vulnerable and disadvantaged people should not be left further behind because of our failure to overcome the pandemic. Ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education is all the more important now. So this boils down to a more and enhanced global cooperation and strong and effective coordinating functions. So the following would be an emerging key messages. The response to the pandemic requires higher level of political commitment, much more additional resources that need to be spent more efficiently, and much broader partners beyond the education sector in order to realize innovation and transformation needed. This takes a stronger global mechanism that orients and informs with evidence and data, monitor and coordinate actions at global, regional, and country levels. It means a higher profile of representation, coupled with a technical capacity to deliver its mandate, and a system-wide reinforcement of UNESCO's role to navigate us and convene the partners. I thank you all for your participation and support for the current steering committee, and I'm trusting that we can together make all our goal realized. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you as well, Kazuhiro Yoshida, and thank you all for sharing your commitment to education. We now have a second question for our audience. So here is our question. Do you agree that we need to protect and rethink education now more than ever? You have two options, yes, definitely, or no. I'd like to invite you all to answer that question. And I would like to also invite Maki Haya Shikawa, Director of the Division of Education 2030 at UNESCO, to talk. She will share the results of this last poll with you.
Thank you very much, Valerian. Let's see the poll results to come out. Okay, wow, it's 100%. Yes, definitely. And what else do we expect?
Great results there. Yes, exactly. What else would you expect? I'll let you talk, Maki. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So wonderful to see all participants gathered today for this very overwhelming support to education. We have also noticed that there has been a number of specific comments on the draft declaration throughout the day. and some participants have been requesting for the floor to share those comments. I would just like to mention again that because the draft declaration has gone through a series of regional consultations and also consultation with our partners and constituencies, we would like to really request all of you either to send in your comments in the Q&A box in Zoom, or to send your comments to your representatives of your regional groups to the drafting committee, who will also be meeting immediately after this meeting today. So with that request, now let us move on to the final plenary session of today's technical segment of the extraordinary session of the 2020 GEM. I wish to express our sincere thanks once again to all of you for your active engagement, despite the challenge of time difference for some of you. Now, without further ado, I wish to invite the 5 rapporteurs from the thematic parallel sessions now to report to us on the key messages and action points from the respective thematic discussions. I would also invite the rapporteurs to highlight any further proposal to their draft declaration, and I ask each rapporteur to keep the reporting to 4 minutes at most. So, the first comer, may I invite Mr. Manos Antoninis, Director of the UNESCO Global Education Monitoring Report, to take the floor on behalf of the thematic session 1 on protecting education finance. So Manos, the floor is yours. Manos? I know that the thematic session 1 ended a bit late.
Okay, it seems like...
yes, here it is. Okay,
we have Manos.
Please, Manos. I'm afraid there is no audio, Manos. Is it?
Manos, could you make sure your mic is activated? Your microphone is not muted? You can activate your microphone at the bottom of the screen.
No.
There we go. Perfect. We can hear you now.
Right.
Manos, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. So I was saying that we had an excellent session with 7 countries: Argentina, Benin, Cambodia, Costa Rica, Guyana, Jordan, Liberia, and Palestine. A very rich discussion, which, as everybody acknowledged, brought the countries to the center, as countries have been linked as never before with a common education concerns, but also bringing in their unique circumstances, whether that's conflict, geography, or past experience. The good thing is these sessions actually continue a very good tradition that has been established in recent months that help countries listen to each other and define their priority responses. It's good to talk to each other. Our moderator, Andreas Schleicher from the OECD, reminds us of the context. Large inequalities in spending existed between rich and poor countries already. Low-income countries account for only 0.5% of total spending on education in the world. Governments bear 4/5 of total spending, which makes them the key player in this debate. And they have very ambitious goals. IMF estimated that to achieve SDGs, 15% extra points of GDP need to be raised to make them happen. In education, 4 percentage points of spending need to come in to achieve our goals. That is really tallying very well with the recent estimates that have been published, which show that added to the $149 billion financing gap to achieve SDG 4 in low and lower middle income countries, there will be perhaps up to 30% more added to that financing gap because of COVID. But if we act now, we can save up to 75%. So this is the context, and countries have reacted, and we had excellent examples of expanding the capacities of the education systems to reach the most marginalized, whether they are the remotest, helping them with radio programs or home-based packages in Guyana, with catch-up programs in Jordan, with new television station in Cambodia, starting with the poorest to reach everyone, as the Argentinian minister said, and genuine efforts, not only to protect, but in some cases, even to increase education. 3 points came out of the discussion. The first is, of course, a big question. More spending is needed. How realistic is this in the middle term? Well, education actors can engage in a more strategic debate than before to help expand the overall fiscal envelope. Debt relief was supported by several speakers. Tax collection and revenue mobilization can be emphasized. Anti-corruption efforts can also be very important. The second point, and that perhaps was the most promising one, if education collaborates and engages with other sectors, a lot of savings can be done and much more sensible financing planning. Palestine presented its examples of improved governance, strengthening decentralization, and bringing interministerial coordination to coordinate the school opening in a very efficient way. Costa Rica discussed how it has interconnected its new education student database online with other databases to target better their poverty reduction programs. So that was a key message. Complementarity between investments need to be achieved. Extra education cannot come at the expense of other sectors. It needs to be co-designed. Third point and final point from our session, an active discussion was taking place in the background about the declaration of the second draft of which we saw. There was a commitment in the first draft, as some observers pointed, to have a 15% share of aid to education going, of the total aid going to education, especially to recover that the decline that education suffered since the early 2000s. Also, to match the commitment, if we expect governments to spend at least 15% of their budget on education, why should donors not do? This would tie in very well with the appeal of many countries, Liberia, Benin, Cambodia, expressed appreciation for the role of donors. And of course, that would also tie in very well with the call that the GPE is making currently on the replenishment of its funds. That summarizes the discussion, and I have to thank the moderator and also the closing speaker from the European Commission for helping frame the discussion very well. And of course, the very, very hardworking note takers in the background. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manos. A very difficult session to summarize, of course, within 4 minutes. May I now invite Ms. Carmen Burbano, Director of Nutrition and School Feeding Program of World Food Program, as a rapporteur for Theme 2 on Safe School Reopening to take the floor. Ms. Carmen Burbano, please.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much to UNESCO for inviting me to take place in this really important meeting. I had the pleasure to sit in and listen to the session on reopening schools safely. We started the session with a very important presentation from WHO, setting the context under which many countries are considering how to open their schools safely. A couple of messages there from WHO are that the proportion of COVID cases among school children is relatively low, and that also evidence seems to suggest that children play a lesser role in the transmission of the virus compared to the rest of the population. So in the conversation, the main message I would say is that the cost of keeping schools closed is greater than the risks that we take by opening those schools, and that really schools should be opened as a matter of priority for many reasons, not only for their education, their opportunity to continue with their learning, but also because children in many cases are living in food insecurity, living in poverty, issues around violence and health and psychosocial support, so that schools become real support systems for children, and the closing of these schools affect them in many ways. We continued with very interesting presentations from different governments on how they are balancing between pandemic containment and also how to open up their school systems safely. And I would say there were 5 major topics that were discussed by the different speakers. The first one is how to open up school systems safely. What measures, what preventative measures and mitigation measures have been put in place? And here, many of the speakers mentioned water, sanitation, hand washing stations, social distancing measures in schools, the provision of personal protective equipment, staggered meal times, and different policies to prevent children from being very close to each other. And very importantly, a lot of our conversation revolved around the idea of creating bubbles, so smaller class sizes and opportunities for children to be in smaller groups that can prevent the wider transmission should that be the case in schools. The second element that we discussed was ensuring the continuity of education once schools are open. This includes meeting children where they are in their learning process, assessing children as they come into school to figure out how and when they missed out on different parts of their education, and meeting them where they are. This includes also children that may have special needs and disabilities, and really having a child by child approach to help them catch up. The third dimension that we discussed was providing the importance of providing clear guidelines and guidance to teachers, students in the community on how to open schools safely, and the really important notion that these guidelines should be done in consultation and communication with everybody in the community, including teachers, parents, students, and the community at large. This also allows for context-specific approaches, both to the opening of schools, but also the fourth topic, which is measures and guidance and protocols for what to do when there is an infection in the school, when there's a COVID case or several cases in the school, and that there was a need to take a context-specific approach. WHO reminded us that the infections or the potential for infections in schools are really dependent on what's happening in the surrounding community. So decisions around how and when to close schools or close specific parts of those schools should be taken, also keeping in mind what's happening in the broader community. And the fifth element that we discussed was restoring services. As schools reopen, the imperative to restore other services that children depend on. This includes health services like deworming, vaccination, school meals, mental and psychosocial services, and also sports and physical activity for children that used to get these activities in school and that need to be restored. Very importantly around this issue, the importance of coordinating intersectorally. It's very clear that the Ministry of Education is the center and the crux of all of these conversations, but there were several mentions about other sectors that need to be consulted, that need to be brought in, including ministries of health, ministries of agriculture when it comes to meals, and other sectors, including local governments, that need to be consulted and coordinated with. To finalize, three cross-cutting issues that came up in the discussion on opening schools safely. One is that we really need to pay attention to age groups. It's not the same talking about children that are in their early childhood years, children that are in their basic primary education years, and children that are in their secondary education or adolescence. They each have their own needs. They each have their own vulnerabilities that need to be taken into consideration when reopening schools. The second element is the costs associated with reopening the schools. We cannot forget that on top of the cost of running the education system, additional costs that bring that basically guarantee the safety of reopening schools do bring additional costs. This includes additional infrastructure, additional water and sanitation issues, protective equipment. Smaller classes bring other costs to education systems that are already burdened. So this issue of connecting the financing discussion that we were just having with the reopening and how to make sure that those costs are covered is really important. And here the importance of not just the national budgets, but also international cooperation, donors, implementing partners, and the community itself around how to finance these additional costs. And lastly, a really important reminder by some of our participants that many countries, especially developing countries, are dealing with challenges that are systemic and that existed before the pandemic. We're talking about inequalities, we're talking about violence and conflict, we're talking about infrastructure problems, quality of education. So really a reminder that although the pandemic, of course, brings additional challenges to this, ministries of education, especially in developing countries, are very much struggling with challenges that were already systemic that need to be brought again to the forefront of these discussions. And lastly, I just want to say on behalf of our group that we would like to ask the drafting team of the declaration that in the section that talks about reopening schools safely, the issue of restoring access to services would need to be better reflected in that final declaration, including, for example, restoring access to health services, to school meals, to mental and psychosocial issues, and also sports and physical activity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brano, for reminding us on all these pertinent points on reopening schools safely. I would like to call next on Ms. Vivica Jensen. Director of the Division for Peace and Sustainable Development here at UNESCO headquarters on behalf of the Thematic Session 3 on Inclusion, Equity, and Gender Equality. So, Viveka, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maki. The third technical segment on leaving no one behind, ensuring a focus on inclusion, equity, and gender equality, was moderated by Nora Files, who is the head of the Secretariat of United Nations Girls' Education Initiative. It included honorable ministers of education from Côte d'Ivoire, Pakistan, Portugal, and distinguished representatives of Italy's Ministry of Education and the UK Foreign Commonwealth Development Office. Professor Elaine Unterhalter of University of London kicked off the session with a very inspiring presentation looking at the challenges to inclusion, equity, and gender equality in education in the context of the COVID pandemic. The discussion that followed provided insights on the steps they had taken and the further actions needed to ensure no one is left behind. And in particular, I'd like to highlight 4 key points. Social and digital divides based on gender, ability, location, language, wealth, and other characteristics are putting the most disadvantaged at risk of learning loss and dropout during the COVID-19. Remote learning programs during school closures must take into account the need to close internet access and skills gaps and ensure safety online, while also offering other methods to support continuity of learning, such as radio, TV, or other means. The Minister of Pakistan reminded us that distance learning is here to stay, and that we need to invest in content development as well as understanding the best methodologies for online learning. The second point is around we must take steps to understand the context and the factors associated with deepening inequalities and vulnerabilities during the pandemic and act on this information. The representative from the UK called for governments and partners to use evidence for more innovative financing, to invest smartly, and to increase financing for education. We must understand the reach and use of remote learning and return to school, and also on learning loss, dropout, and other forms of exclusion. Cooperation with health, protection, and other sectors will be needed to understand and to respond to the intersecting issues that affect children during school closures. And the UN Special Rapporteur reminded us of the particular importance of involving ministries of finance. Inclusive learning settings for those with disabilities were highlighted as essential to reach out to all learners, as set out in SDG 4 and as explained by the GLAD network representative. Thirdly, holistic responses are needed to build back more equal education systems which are resilient and equipped to address future crises and that are based on the fundamental principles of inclusion, equity, and non-discrimination, and the firm conviction that every learner matters and matters equally. The Minister of Portugal shared with us his country's experience in doing just this, keeping schools open for the children of key workers during the pandemic, providing meals to all students in need, and making Portuguese language training available to children from non-Portuguese speaking backgrounds. And fourthly, the return to school provides a unique opportunity to ensure that all children who were out of school before and during the pandemic are included within all school reopening plans, and that we truly leave no child behind. The representative from Italy explained that their school communities took action to mitigate social isolation connected with school closures, and that true education is founded on diversity and the inclusion of all. The Minister of Côte d'Ivoire told us that the slogan for their new school year is "Tout mobilisé," we are all mobilized. And I believe this slogan should apply to all of us. There were no specific changes requested to the outcome declaration, but one participant called for further means to monitor the implementation of the declaration commitments with a monitoring framework and the necessary resources for UNESCO and its partners to report effectively on progress in implementing the commitments at the next ordinary session of the GEM. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Viveka. Difficult session to summarize. Now, let me invite Ms. Yumiko Yokozeki, Director of UNESCO ICPA, as the rapporteur for the thematic session 4 on reimagining teaching and learning. Please, I hope the rapporteurs will try to keep the 4 minutes, being wary of the time left for our session. So Yumiko-san, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Max-san. Imagining a teaching and learning session had over 120 participants and a very rich discussion with country experience from Bhutan, Colombia, Rwanda, Ghana, Canada, and ideas and research results, good examples and reflections from academia, youth representative, teachers union, and the World Bank. This reminded me of a beautiful carpet woven with rich colors and textile. Very difficult to summarize this rich discussion, but I will try. Our discussion highlighted some of the challenges in teaching and learning in this pandemic context, and also some ways forward. At first, learners' well-being and mental health is suffering, and this put unexpected demand on teachers and schools to do more than just transmit knowledge. And learners need tools to cope with a crisis and take charge of their learning using engaging strategies such as games or interactive creativity. And teachers are also under monumental strain, personally and also in their professional capacity. And however, they are also demonstrating remarkable capacities and resilience to innovate, to adapt to unprecedented conditions. As such, this crisis highlighted a number of things. First, a pivotal role of teachers in this learning process. Nothing can replace teachers. Teachers are the center of learning and the inspiration for learners. We all know this because we are here because of our teachers. Education is above all a human interaction that is not limited to the classrooms. Schools are important social spaces that keep learners, families, and communities connected. This crisis created a global awareness that we are interconnected. This made us realize that the citizenship education, social-emotional competence, solidarity, empathy, and sympathy are very important teaching content. And teachers took leadership, bringing innovation to reach to the most marginalized and vulnerable population. Accordingly, technology should not dictate education. Education has to dictate how technology can work for it. Teachers are motivated to develop their digital skills, but they are also want to be supported, motivated, connected, and empowered to lead and make the pedagogical choice they think are required to meet learners' needs. This is the great potential for teachers' continuous professional development. And the cookie-cutter approaches will not work. Solutions applicable to TVET will not apply to adult education or early childhood education. Tools need to be diversified, fit to purposes, flexible and diverse, to driven by the primary stakeholders, which is teachers and the learners themselves, through dialogue, social dialogue. And teachers' pedagogical competencies should include solid knowledge on how to align curricular, pedagogy, and assessment, in particular conduct assessment and use assessment data to ensure correct diagnosis for improving learning. And learning as we do is a lesson. This pandemic and the most powerful tool to strengthen this resilience of the education system and ensure education content is relevant. Teachers must be consulted and discussed. Some governments did not reach out to teachers before they embarked on emergency plans. Teachers' voices are extremely important. Teachers are not just to be supported, but they should be activated to be an important solution. We did not have enough time to discuss important subjects such as higher education, global awareness created by this crisis of people-planet relationship, and also some risks created by this emergency mode. I believe that this important discussion will continue. Teacher Task Force globally and also ICBA in Africa will continue working on teacher development and encourage and continue this dialogue. Finally, I would like to thank all presenters and excellent moderators and note takers. Thank you very much. Over to you, Maki-san.
Thank you very much, Yumiko-san. A very elaborate summary, despite the short time. And lastly, but of course not the least, I wish to ask my colleague, Mr. Mark West of the Future of Learning and Innovation at UNESCO here to take the floor to report back on the thematic session 5 on harnessing connectivity. So Mark, the floor is yours. And 4 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Maki. We had a very rich discussion on the uses of technology for education, and it's my pleasure to communicate 5 major messages that emerged from our discussion. First, there has been a global recognition of the centrality of connectivity to education and learning. It is no longer a nice to have, but a need to have. Connectivity must become an engine for equity and inclusion rather than widening existing divides, especially wealth and gender divides, as it has too often done during the pandemic. We need to redouble our search for new and expanded and innovative financing to close connectivity gaps. It's important to note that this effort is not purely about more networks and fiber optic cables, but about helping people make productive use of technology they can access in the here and now. A speaker from the GSMA noted that usage gaps, those who can access connectivity but do not use it for empowering purposes, is 6 times greater than connectivity gaps. We need to work collectively to make connectivity for learning universal and clarify our collective understandings of what investments will make the biggest impacts. Second, while connectivity and technology for education has never been more important, our speakers reminded us it is not a panacea. Speakers advised us to avoid a silver bullet syndrome. EdTech solutions take time to build, test, implement, and improve, and we are unlikely to see major impacts overnight. It is a long and laborious process, but worthy of persistence and continued investment. Third, technology and connectivities are tools in a much wider repertoire of tools and must be carefully positioned in the broader ecosystem of education. They should establish synergies across sectors. Public supportive technology should not compete with other sectors, but reinforce connections between them. And this has never been more apparent than during the pandemic in light of the deep connections between the health and education sectors. Fourth, improvements in technology need not be a race to adopt and implement high-tech solutions. The moderator of our session, Rob Jenkins of UNICEF, noted research showing that in some countries, students found educational radio broadcasts more personalized and helpful than internet and other digitally based approaches. The minister from the Republic of Congo-Brazzaville, who was in our session, noted how his country has made productive use of the televisions many families own to support the continuity of learning during the pandemic. In summary, we need innovation on how to use all of our technologies, from low-tech to high-tech, in service of education. And finally, the fifth point, EdTech needs a change in mindset, a shift from being largely business-focused to putting the public good front and center. Uses of technology and connectivity need to be anchored in human rights and view education as a global common good. We need to expand our imaginations to build digital commons that will facilitate learning for all, not just a select few that can pay expensive subscription fees, view advertising, or trade their personal data. Partnerships with the private sector are absolutely crucial, but the starting point needs to be strengthening commitments to the common good and reinforcing the right to education. Thank you very much, Maki. It was a fascinating discussion, and looking forward to the meeting on Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark, for the very succinct summary. We have now heard from all the 5 thematic sessions. I know it is not easy to summarize such rich and diverse sharing that took place in each of the thematic sessions. However, the key messages were clear, action points, and how we can take forward the commitments were clearly discussed. We have also taken note of the specific comments and inputs on the draft declaration that the drafting committee will make sure to review after this. We have indeed been inspired by the experiences, knowledge, and innovation shared by our countries and partners, reiterating the importance of partnership, collaboration, and coordination of efforts, especially across sectors, for bigger and sustainable impact, so that we can rebuild our system stronger without leaving no one behind. I thank our 5 rapporteurs once again, And also a big thank you to all the moderators, speakers, note takers for the valuable contributions. And of course, I should not forget to thank the session leads here who put the session together in such short notice. With this, I wish to conclude this plenary session. Thank you very much. Back to you, Valerian.
Thank you, Maki. Thank you, Maki Hayashikawa. And a big thank you to all of you for sharing your conclusions. May I now invite to the floor Benjamin Ghazi, Chief Director at the Ministry of Education of Ghana.
Thank you.
Hello, Benjamin Ghazi. Thank you for being with us.
Yes.
There
Hello.
we go. Now we have you on screen, so I'll give you the floor.
Thank you very much. First, I bring you the greetings from my minister, the Minister for Education of Ghana, who is not able to join us today. I've been following the discussions, and I must say that I am impressed by the global support for education. You can see that every country is making every effort to make education a priority. And that is good news for global development. And the effort of ensuring that education is inclusive and accessible to all, especially the marginalized, and see that countries are making efforts to do distance learning models, both on TV and on radio, so that education loss is reduced to the barest minimum, especially during the pandemic. And we in Ghana were able to develop and broadcast over 1,200 lessons to children at home during the school closure. We've also seen the importance of teacher education reform. We train teachers in the use of remote distance and emergency teaching delivery, so that when we encounter pandemics like this or emergencies like we had during COVID, teachers will be able to deliver online lessons to children at home. And here in Ghana, by way of teacher reforms, 32,000 pre-service teachers have been taken through the technique of delivering online lessons so that they would be equipped enough to deliver lessons during pandemic. Also not left behind those who are already in the teaching profession. Through continuous professional development for teachers, we've exposed them to the realities of emergencies like COVID, and we've also made them aware of the need to make education more resilient to emergencies going forward. To conclude, I want to say that going forward, the use of technology in education must be given absolute priority, especially for those of us in Africa and the other parts of the world where technology is not so prominent. Your Excellencies, these are the few remarks that I want to make at this time. Thank you very much for your attention. Hello.
Hello.
Hope I'm not mute.
Yes,
Thank
Valerian.
you very much. Thank Thank you for this 2020 Global Education meeting. And may I now invite to the floor Grunde Almeland, State Secretary at the Norwegian Ministry of Education at the Norwegian
Thank you.
Education.
Thank you. I believe the connectivity issues there were a bit.
If you can all hear us,
yeah.
Grunde. Grunde, can you hear us?
I can hear you now, yes. Thank you so much. Your Excellencies, dear friends, it is my honor and privilege to sum up today's segment of the 2020 Global Education meeting. Victor Hugo once wrote that he who opens a school door closes a prison. Today's discussions have been about opening just those school doors. Even if the pandemic is still ongoing, we need to do our best to reopen every single school door. Denying a child its fundamental right to education is to imprison that child in a jail of ignorance. As most countries, Norway closed all schools, kindergartens, and universities when the pandemic hit us in March. And from the very second we closed them, we were dedicated towards making sure that every single student could keep on learning. We also wanted to reopen all schools, kindergartens, and university campuses as soon as possible. And we managed to do so by mid-June. During the lockdown period, we were especially concerned about the situation for our most vulnerable children. Many children consider their school or kindergarten as a safe haven, a place where they can receive much needed care and attention in addition to learning. Closing schools is not only denying a child's access to education, it can also be denying them safety and protection against violence and other forms of mistreatment which no child should ever have to experience. Listening to all your inspiring inputs today, I am confident that we all share a desire to provide every single child with a quality education, and that no pandemic can stop us from doing our utmost to reach the goals of the SDG 4, quality education for all. Despite the difference in the challenges that we are facing, we have all experienced real setbacks during the last few months. But I know we will build back, and together we will build back even stronger than before. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts and experiences. Let us all commit to strengthening international cooperation and cross-border dialogue on education. The pandemic has taught us that we are much stronger together than we are on our own. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. I don't know, maybe Valerian has some connectivity issue, so I can take the floor as I'm supposed to really conclude, close the doors of this very, very inspiring and interesting discussion today, a long, long marathon. I wish to say really a big thank to all participants. We had some 25 ministers around the table, around the different tables in different rooms, more than 400 participants. It's really great discussion, a lot about the what. I don't want to repeat. My colleagues summarized very well from the five thematic discussion about the how. I think we have really a unique opportunity to make this collective effort to protect education, to promote education in the next and coming months. Either we talk of financial dimension or the need we have to rethink, to transform education in order to give solutions and assure the right to education for all children in the world. This is our common responsibility and mission. Let me say to conclude that today, as we are talking in this virtual global room, still 32 countries have their school system closed. It's about affecting 500 million children. So we are still in the middle of the crisis. And I think that it should be very interesting and important to listen to heads of state and ministers on the 22nd, in a couple of days, on Thursday, in another global meeting, the second part of this global education meeting 2020. So I warmly invite all of you to attend, to participate when the declaration, the outcome declaration of this meeting will be hopefully approved and become, a concrete tool in our hands as international organization, but mostly in member states' hands, in order to assure continuity learning and start with accelerating process of EduTech4 in this COVID-19 time. So thank you very much. A big thank to all of you, and also UNESCO great team to organize such amazing discussion. Bye-bye. And thanks to Valeriana, who disappeared last in connectivity, but we'll have back her in the next meeting on Thursday, 22nd. Thank you very much.